Welcome to the Podforce One podcast. I'm Miranda Devine. Today we're joined by Harmeet Dhillon. She runs the Justice Department's very powerful Civil Rights Division. Harmeet Dhillon, thank you so much for joining Podforce One.
I can't wait for this conversation.
Now, you are leading the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which is a notorious hotbed of leftist activism, social engineering. And it must have been a huge shock to them to have you arrive. You're a conservative. You've represented as a lawyer in private practice so many high-profile conservatives who've been targeted by the left. What was your welcome like?
Well, you got a clue of what the welcome was going to be like from the Judiciary Committee hearing, where basically all the Democrat senators came after me, and every Democrat civil rights, every liberal civil rights group in America came after me. And so, the knives were already out. And I think no one was surprised by what my direction was going to be. But I think they might have been surprised at the speed and determination with which we immediately made changes in the Civil Rights Division. So I was confirmed by the Senate in early April. The president had nominated me back in December. And, so people had a lot of time to get prepared. And I was warned that there'll be some Easter eggs hidden, and like bad Easter eggs hidden in the bowels of the DOJ, things that the DOJ prior administration might have done immediately before the changeover of power. And there was kind of a vacuum between the president swearing in and the time that inferior officials in the DOJ get confirmed. So a lot of mischief could be done by interim leaders. And so what I did was you come into the government, it's like any other big business, if you will. You got to do your HR training. And in the case of the government, you got to figure out how to handle sensitive documents. So a lot of training in the week one. But I fired off 50 letters to America's top 50 institutions of higher learning the end of that first week, demanding their documents and compliance with Students for Fair Admissions and other, DEI issues. So we sort of launched that pretty hard. And then the second week, I wrote memos to each of the 11 or 12 sections that I supervise in the Civil Rights Division, laying out what the federal laws are that we administer, the venerable federal civil rights laws dating back to the Klan Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Title VI, Title VII, Title IX, and so many others. And then I said, we're going to be changing our priorities in each of your sections, and we're going to take the lead from the White House and the president's executive orders. And so we're still going to enforce all of these laws, but through a different lens than what you've been doing. So please put your pencils down, make sure that the work that you're doing is consistent with this direction. And if it isn't, we're going to need to change it. And you may recall that at the same time, the DOJ folks working with OMB had offered severance packages to government officials who perhaps wanted to use this opportunity to go do something else with their lives. So in the case of DOJ folks, they were offered 5-month packages, just, for your average lawyer with some tenure there. It's a 6-figure lump sum. So more than half the lawyers in the Civil Rights Division reacted to these memos by quitting.
Right.
And
that was about 400 of them?
Well, there were over 400 lawyers, so more than 200 quit.
Right.
And then since that time, another close to 100 have quit. I mean, it's like not quite 75%, but maybe approaching 70% have quit. And they did it in phases. And I think there was some denial, and, they had crying sessions together, and they had,
because you asked them to obey the law and just follow what the democratically elected president's priorities were.
And frankly, it was shocking to them. They had unhappy hours, things like that. It was like a lot of drama and hand-wringing. And they have a support group outside and a spokesperson who constantly goes on MSNBC and trashes me and what we're doing.
Big Pharma blames everyone but themselves for high prescription drug prices. The truth? Pharmaceutical companies control drug prices and keep raising them, even as Americans struggle to afford the medications they need. This year alone, they've raised prices on almost 700 drugs. Don't be fooled. Big Pharma looks out for themselves while you pay the price. Learn more at pharmareformalliance.com, paid for by Pharmaceutical Reform Alliance, Inc. Ever read the label on a typical bag of chips? It's often a science experiment of seed oils, MSG, artificial dyes, and mystery ingredients. But Massa is part of the growing movement to bring back real food. Massa's chips contain just 3 ingredients: organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. Not only do these chips avoid the bad stuff, they also taste incredible too. Personally, my favorite is Cobanero. If you love Massa, then you'll love Vandy Crisps. Vandy is Massa's sister company and makes the most delicious 3-ingredient potato chips. I like the Smokehouse Barbecue. Ready to give Massa or Vandy a try? Use code PODFORCE1 for 25% off your first order at massachips.com or vandycrisps.com, or simply click the link in the video description or scan the QR code to claim this offer. Don't feel like ordering online? Massa and Vandy are now available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. Stop by and pick up a couple of bags before they're gone.
I think this is the biggest single personnel self-purge in DOJ history.
Right.
I mean,
congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't fire anybody.
Right.
I just told them they had to do their job differently. They self-deported, with a nice golden parachute from the government.
Yeah.
But so that's
to be picked up by all the Democrat law firms in DC.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
pseudo nonprofits, activists, whatever. No one should cry for them. They are going to be doing just fine for the most part. A couple of people tried to come back after apparently maybe they couldn't get work outside, but we immediately, determined to move on. And so it has posed some challenges. Because,
what do you do with you've lost 70% of your workforce?
Well, it's challenging in 2 ways. First of all, I did make a commitment, which I firmly believe, because I have been a longtime civil rights lawyer, and enforcing all of these laws. I believe in them. I think they're important. And you still have to enforce them. And then secondly, we have this whole ambitious affirmative agenda of the Trump administration that has never been done in a Republican administration before. Aggressively protecting the rights of people of faith, dismantling the DEI edifice that has grown up over decades, and some of those excesses, and trying to enforce our criminal laws, hate crime laws that impact all Americans, not just some Americans. So it's an ambitious agenda. So there was a struggle to, get the paperwork done to finally start hiring people, but we have gotten that logjam broken. Now we're in the hiring mode, and now we have a little bit of a supply problem because the conservative side has not done a great job of encouraging lawyers to be the Peace Corps for liberty, if you will, or to do their tour of duty in the government. People go straight from being members of the Federalist Society in law schools to engaging in ponderous debates on arcane theory to making a lot of money in big corporate law firms that don't do any good to advance the liberty interests that we're talking about here. I mean, I confronted this early in my career, but eventually, made my own way and created my own civil rights organization and a firm that does all this good work. But that has been a bit of an evangelical challenge. So every time I go out and I speak to a group of lawyers, I give them a little lecture about how it's kind of their duty to give back. And on the left, they do that. Well, the difference is all the big law firms I'm talking about, they're captured by the left. And so they will happily grant 100 or 1,000 hours to a lawyer to go do a death penalty case on some technical foul that may have occurred, or pro-abortion work. We do not have institutions like that, large institutions like that on the right. And so that's been a challenge.
And also, I guess the law schools are all captured by the left as well. So it's very hard. I know I've spoken to conservative law students who, find it difficult to get jobs and clerkships and all sorts of the sort of apparatus that the left has around its mentoring of young lawyers.
I mean, getting a clerkship you can do because you do that through the Federalist Society network and pipeline. But getting a job after that, after openly being a conservative in one of these big law firms, people erase conservative groups from their resumes. They're not creative in thinking about these opportunities. If you're prioritizing money over values, then it's a pretty easy choice to go where the money is. But ultimately, I did that for about 10 years. There weren't choices at the beginning of my career. I've been a lawyer for over 3 decades. There were no conservative institutions or conservative law firms. You couldn't get a job doing that. And so I just found it very soulless to go to work every day and not feel good about what I did all day long. And so I created it myself, but not everyone is entrepreneurial. So,
and you've made quite big sacrifice because you've had to sell, I think, your private law firm that you built up and was so successful to come into public service, take, I presume, an enormous pay cut, and then move from your beautiful house in San Francisco with the big garden and et cetera to the dreaded swamp.
The swamp.
Yeah. Why did you do all that?
Well, so I have lived in idyllic, wacky California for 25 years before I came here to DC. And actually, when I did one tour of duty in DC between college and law school, I determined to never live in DC again. And so here I am. But there's a couple of things. First of all, over the last few years, I did represent President Trump, and my law firm represented President Trump's campaign. One of my partners is the White House counsel, David Warrington, and another partner is Deputy White House counsel. Right. They're both in the West Wing. And so, the president called me and with AG Bondi and Elon Musk one day in November after the election. And you get a call from the three of them sitting around the pool at Mar-a-Lago.
Really?
And it's
just out of the blue.
Out of the blue.
Wow.
I didn't recognize the number other than it was Florida.
And where were you then?
I was at my home in San Francisco.
Right.
And
cooking something.
Gardening, knitting. My husband had passed away like 3 months earlier. And so I was kind of trying to figure out my next purpose in life. I was proud to have just come home from Arizona, where the campaign had put me in charge of running the election in Arizona, which was successful for that effort. And, you get a request like that to come help your country. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so, I had a home in Sonoma also, right close to the ocean. You can see whales from there. You can't see whales from my house in DC and Capitol Hill, but it is a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice for every single person who does it. It's not pleasant in DC. It's actually thoroughly unpleasant, quite frankly.
Because it's such a Democrat town.
It's not just Democrat town. It's such a company town. Even the conservative lobbyists or whoever makes their lifestyles over there, you have to get used to a culture of walk into a restaurant, like a steakhouse, and every single person turns around to see did somebody important walk in. Right. Because if they did, then they're going to get up from their table and abandon whoever they were having dinner with and go suck up to whatever senator, congressman, DOJ official has walked into the room.
It's Joe Biden's perfect town.
It is. And, but there's some people who thrive in that. I just find it repulsive, and it is what it is. And so I like to say that in San Francisco, for all of its foibles, first of all, very beautiful city, and I really enjoyed living there. They treat the federal judge and the barista exactly the same.
Right.
There's no status issue there.
Like New York.
It's just, like here, it's just, this is a very transactional town too, but very transparently transactional as opposed to fake sort of fake nobility. But so that's been an interesting anthropological experiment that I will probably write about in my memoirs one day. But I have a nice house in DC, and it's just trying to live. I've got a garden. I brought my dahlias from San Francisco. I planted them at my house in DC, and trying to have some mental space and continuity.
Now, the Biden administration, you now have got some insight into what they were up to. It seems to me like a very malign and orchestrated weaponization of all aspects of the federal government, particularly the Department of Justice, against conservative Trump supporters. We had, parents at school board meetings targeted by the FBI, traditional Catholics, pro-lifers, January 6 people raided, and it really, and then of course Donald Trump himself, but it just seemed almost like a nightmare now you look back at it, but it was so normalized at the time. Do you know who was orchestrating it, and how involved was Joe Biden? Because I don't buy that he was checked out the entire 4 years. I know that he has cognitive issues, but they waxed and waned. And I think he was maliciously focused on Trump and his supporters personally, and protecting his own family's corruption, of course.
Well, let's talk about it mechanically and then the substance of it. So here's my political take on it. just from my prior work before joining the DOJ, which is the left apparatus of Obama, which was well entrenched in those 8 years, did not expect Trump to win. I don't think most conservatives expected Trump to win. So
he probably didn't.
I won't say that. He was very confident and a great leader, but I will tell you that I was a new member of the Republican National Committee. I mean, quite a few of those people didn't expect the president to win, and he did, and he beat the odds, and they just were clearly not tapped into the American people. So there was an immediate shock to the system. Now, in all the years, let's just take the Civil Rights Division. In all the years that there have been changeovers of power between the parties, the Civil Rights Division didn't change at all. Okay, the personnel didn't change. There were literally lawyers that had been there for their entire 30, 40, even 50-year plus careers.
Wow.
They didn't change. The Republicans appointed for those positions didn't force change the way I did. And I'm not blaming anybody for that. It's like, if you're going to be part of the DC culture, you got to play nice with people. I get it. But nobody had that vision of like, we're going to brutally change this place to how it should be. And we're going to change it for the permanently. And so
that's why Republicans never really achieved any change.
It's just,
in the past.
I mean, you can't be Mr. Nice Guy. You have to break eggs to make an omelet. And I just know that as a manager, a CEO of 2 different organizations I created. It's like, you can be popular or you can be effective. You can't be both at the same time for the most part. So anyway, that's like the mechanical thing. And then they thought they had defeated Trump the second time when the lawfare succeeded. It did succeed. And part of that was COVID. Part of that was a persistent failure by the conservative apparatus to make enforcement of election laws at the state level a priority, or also to even bother to run and rule at the state level. And I think there's a lot of this whining that, why aren't you fixing things in DC? Why don't you just like go fix things with the stroke of a pen? Well, we have a political system that the founders set down, and most of that work needs to be done in the states, and it's hard. And you have to raise money, and you have to do all of those things. So that happened.
Is that for election integrity in the state level?
Just for one. And you look at the gender issues, all the issues that people want to fix in DC could and should have been fixed or stopped at the state level. But that requires organization, work, dedication, fundraising, a non-grifty culture of that. And I think the left has just managed that much better. I mean, they have Arabella advisors and these other, Soros groups, Tides Foundation, Ford Foundation. They're very effective at deploying the money to nonprofits, or as I call them, pseudo nonprofits that are really weaponizing. So then you come back to what happened. So none of the personnel changed between really below the Senate confirmed level and the DOJ. There wasn't a lot of change over there. There's also this culture in the Department of Justice and all the U.S. attorneys' offices that somehow the DOJ lawyers are better than other lawyers. Like they are some class or cut above, and they're like more noble, and they have some principles and nobody else does. And that ain't true. Let me tell you right now. We are all lawyers who have ethical obligations, and no one's better than anybody else. I think the criminal defense lawyers play an extremely important role in our functioning system of government. The founders did too. So I have great respect for the lawyers on the opposite side typically. And I think that just didn't exist in the DOJ, frankly. And that arrogance has translated into and helped weaponize the lawfare. Now, you asked about Biden. I have never met him personally, don't know his cognitive state, but I do think it's the case that almost all of the personnel puppeteering the White House were Obama personnel. Right. Susan Rice and all these other people and all these consultants, Lisa Monaco. When I go do my weekly meetings with people in the DOJ and I'm waiting for my appointment, I look up in the pictures of all the portraits. They're all the, recent ones are all the same bad guys, sometimes twice, because they were in the first, they were in Obama and then they were in the Biden administration. It's just like moved up to different places. And so we have these photographs of all the prior leaders. So it's kind of interesting,
So it's Obama's third term in a way.
It was Obama's third term.
Yeah.
Now, with some personal axes to grind, mind you, family peccadillos of the Biden family were quite of a different order of magnitude. I mean, President Obama's kids weren't up to anything nefarious in the, the oligarch sphere, unlike Biden's family clearly was. So the Biden family business had to keep running. That definitely occurred. And so I think there's almost certainly, I know there was interference between legitimate efforts to go after and investigate Biden family. Because I know that from my private practice. I represented journalistic organizations, including at the time Project Veritas, which was being prosecuted or investigated for acquiring the Ashley Biden diary, not publishing it.
No,
just acquiring
tell us about that.
Well, there's some aspects of that case that are still ongoing, but Southern District of New York was filled with prosecutors who worked hand in hand with the Biden family's private lawyers to obtain warrants, to investigate, to try to keep all of that secret, to pierce the attorney-client privilege, to pierce the First Amendment privileges that are, in the common law in our system, and to really abuse the system. I mean, typically, the Department of Justice does have some rules and regulations that are quite good. And when you go after a state, or when you go after a journalist, or when you go after public corruption, and when you go after a lawyer's communications with their client, there are certain additional layers of protection that are meant to be in place. You look at the rules around the FISA court that are meant to be in place. Very high-level officials are supposed to sign off on these things. So we saw in the witch hunts against President Trump, high-level DOJ officials, including some that, he may have appointed, just rubber stamping the most outrageous transgressions of ethics, facts, and good policy on a daily basis. And it's just truly shocking and disgusted me from my profession, some of the things I've seen.
And constitutionally protected people.
First Amendment is sacred to me. I mean, literally, I went to law school because I was a college journalist and I saw what happened to my colleagues in college. I was on 60 Minutes complaining about attacks on college journalists in the 1980s. Yeah. And so that's why I went to law school, because it's so sacred to me and it is so unique in America.
Yes,
you don't have it in the UK.
Yes.
You don't have it anywhere else in the world.
I think it's why America is the freest place still. I mean, even with all these assaults.
That's right.
The First Amendment and the Second Amendment. And I've lived a lot of my time in Australia and worked somewhat in England, and it's not the same.
There's no free speech in Canada. I mean, Americans just assume that everywhere where English is spoken, speech is free. Not so.
But you can trash it here.
You can trash it here. In fact, I just this morning, someone who I respect texted me a fairly heinous thing that's being posted near a college campus and said, "Look at this, it's horrible." I'm like, it is horrible, and it's also protected by the First Amendment. Yeah. So we do have to make a lot of hard judgment calls in that regard.
Ashley Biden was the daughter of Joe Biden, or is the daughter of Joe Biden. Yeah. And she had been in drug rehab and left behind a private diary with, some things that people weaponized, I think, against her unfairly. But one of them was she felt that, she said, maybe I had inappropriate showers with my dad. Now, I think people have made more of that than they should, because this was a private exploration of her childhood. But that made it newsworthy. And so it was sold by somebody to Project Veritas, which is this sort of guerrilla media outfit. And they chose not to publish it. And yet they were raided at dawn and paraded, arrested. And the New York Times was tipped off at the same time.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to adopt all of those facts,
right.
And it was an attorney-client relationship for me, and I, know a lot about the backstory. But I think what's publicly known in court filings is our efforts, and there were 4 different law firms working on this for the Project Veritas side. There was a criminal firm, and there was my firm, and there was a defamation-related practice, and then another firm that was giving regular journalism First Amendment advice on state law issues to the organization. So all of us working together as a team attacked this from different angles. And, ultimately we won some and ultimately we lost some. And I just found it shocking that lawyers in America thought it was okay to, there's a United States Supreme Court ruling on the issue. It's called Bartnicki versus Vopper. On the extent to which a journalistic organization can be held liable for how some piece of very important information like the Pentagon Papers came to their attention. This is a lot of protections for journalists. Some you may disagree with because of, there's
National
harm
security.
in the margins.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's the call made by the United States Supreme Court.
And they didn't even publish it. That's the
they
ridiculous
didn't publish
thing.
it.
Yeah.
And someone else apparently got their hands on it and published part of it or what have you.
Online, yeah.
And, it's somebody's diary. Who wants their diary published?
Exactly.
That's
I don't
fair,
blame them being upset, but it's a pretty heavy-handed use of the Department of Justice.
Well, it's outrageous. It's outrageous to investigate lawyers and their communications and say that there's no privilege, because they teach you this in law school. You have to think about, from a jurisprudence perspective, what if the tables were turned? So they tell you to think about this from the veil of ignorance. And how would you feel about this if the parties were flipped or the facts were flipped? So the piercing of privilege is hugely problematic. And that's another sacred thing in our culture, that there's almost never an excuse to
legal
pierce.
privilege.
Correct. There's almost never an excuse to pierce a lawyer's privilege. And yet we've seen this Department of Justice and the prior hands go after many lawyers, go after their communications with their clients. And my law firm represented the former president and his campaign. And my law firm's name, the Dhillon Law Group, is repeatedly mentioned in the Arctic Frost disclosures as a target of these communications. We represented the Republican National Committee.
They spied on you?
Yes, according to Arctic Frost. So we're going to get to the bottom of that at some point. Not me, because
So they had like a warrant for your...
Let's just say that we were part of the investigative targets, and that's because we represented the Republican National Committee.
Wow.
And we represented the Trump campaign, and we represented some of the other MAGA entities. And so, we're all over the place there, as are several other law firms of current DOJ officials.
Well, Rudy Giuliani, who was then the president's lawyer, he was spied on by the Department of Justice. The FBI had a warrant out on his communications, and he didn't know, of course, because you don't get told until well afterwards. They had some sort of bogus FARA investigation into him. He was never charged.
Right.
Bob Costello, who was his lawyer, and also Steve Bannon's lawyer, same thing. He's spied on.
Yeah, this is a gross abuse of power.
Has it ever happened before?
Not to my knowledge. I have never heard of this. And to date, I haven't gotten any official notification.
Right. I think it takes a couple of years for
and
Apple
neither have the other lawyers involved in the Veritas case. No one's been told that this happened. We just, if your phone starts acting funny and things like that, you just assume it. And so it's just kind of very chilling. Yeah. That you have that. But anyway, yes, this was the culture. And then again, I'm not going to comment on ongoing investigations, but it's been publicly noted that there were documents concealed in burn bags, and there were documents
at the FBI.
And and you have James Comey using a alias email to communicate, and giving himself a title of a philosopher to do that. And it's kind of insane type of arrogance that we've seen.
Can any of this be, I know there are attempts now to create a kind of conspiracy case against everybody going back from Russiagate right through to, 2024 election. But is there how do you feel, like in your heart as a lawyer for a long time, do you think any of these people will be held accountable? The Jim Comeys, the John Brennans, the Adam Schiffs, the Lisa Monacos, right up to the Obamas and the Hillary Clintons?
Yeah, I'm going to take a pass on that. These are civil rights violations that allegedly occurred against the targets. And so I'll just leave it at that. I'm, actively engaged in the work that I do at the DOJ. And I do believe that when you have the First Amendment implicated, when we have conspiracy statutes under the Klan Act and other statutes that involve conspiracies against rights, and they can involve government actors, and they can involve conspiring with non-government actors to violate the civil rights of an American citizen. And lawyers are citizens, and elected officials are citizens.
So non-government actors, like people like Norm Eisen, the Color Revolution
Color Revolution, and some of the architects many of the civil rights violations we've seen in our country over the last many years were not necessarily government officials. Government officials may have worked to carry them out. And I'll give you an example of one from my private practice before I joined the DOJ, is the massive censorship of online popular accounts, conservative accounts on Twitter, now known as X. I represented a lawyer, Rogan O'Hanley, named nickname handled DC Drano, very popular account in social media. And he was removed from X for a period of years, and Twitter, I should say, not X. And, we followed the thread, and it turns out that through document requests that National Association of Secretaries of State, a voluntary organization, was working hand in hand with Democrat secretaries of state, including California's, and so-called nonprofits like Stanford Observatory and other projects on America's campuses who are getting, probably USAID and God knows what other federal funding to do it. And taking, and a Democrat consulting firm, hired by the California Secretary of State. SKD Knickerbocker was the name of this outfit. And they were paid $25 million to analyze
by the Association of Secretary of State.
By the state of California, by my tax dollars, which I paid a lot in those 25 years in California. To who's saying wrong things on the internet, and how can we make them stop?
So what were they said? It was this COVID mandate?
Election related. It became COVID related to any wrong thing. Who knows? Maybe environmental related. I mean, that
Hunter Biden's laptop. We were censored for that.
If Elon Musk hadn't bought Twitter, it would still be going on there. Now, there's been an apology tour of Mark Zuckerberg and others. When the power shifted again, President Trump became 47. Suddenly, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa will never happen again.
Sincere.
There's still a lot of this stuff happening at some level.
What about Wikipedia, for instance?
Wikipedia is just a gross offender. I just saw a quote from their founder yesterday saying that Wikipedia should publish the names of its volunteer editors so we can all see who's doing the defamation, because every conservative prominent person with an account of Wikipedia, myself included, has some gross smears and distortions on there. Absolute trash.
Totally
and it
false.
Comes back at you in a Senate confirmation hearing as if it's fact.
Oh, wow.
It's insane. And then you add, there's a whole new thing happening, which is AI trolling the internet using Wikipedia as a source and then hallucinating defamation about people. My old law firm has a case that they took on after I left involving Robbie Starbuck, the Tennessee activist. The search results in Google were just saying really offensive things about him that are completely divorced from reality. And it's going to happen to a lot of people. I just saw several different conservative accounts say, I'm not dead. I'm not on my deathbed. This is all AI generated garbage.
But it always AI generated goes in one direction.
Correct.
Because their training materials are Wikipedia, etc.
Yes. And these large language models are, based on trash. And I did a little computer programming in the 1980s, and I learned garbage in, garbage out. And that is exactly what's happening with a lot of this stuff. And so scary.
Can anything be done with Wikipedia? I mean, they are supposedly an NGO, a nonprofit, and yet they're supposed to be unbiased, and yet they're incredibly biased.
I think private parties could take them on for defamation. Certainly, you have to.
Is there anything that the Civil Rights Division can get involved in?
I can't really comment on that. I'll give that some thought. But generally speaking, we don't go after private institutions. We may do that if they're found to have been in conspiracy with some statute, under some statute that we protect. But generally speaking, we go after state governments, actually. The main target of the Civil Rights Division in our conspiracy type work is, and some other statutes, is state actors. So for example, we go after bad cops who violate the civil rights of Americans. When we're doing employment work, we go after state employers who are violating civil DEI rules, for example, the perpetuation of race-based discrimination and hiring in a state entity is illegal under federal law. And so we would go after those. But for the most part, private plaintiffs, like for what I did for all the years before I came to the Civil Rights Division, was use state and federal statutes to go after private parties like that. And so I think there isn't a role for the government to fix everything, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I mean, you've also gotten involved in some crimes, really horrific crimes in blue cities where citizens have been let down by defund the police and all sorts of kind of DEI practices. And one of them was Irina Zarutska, who was the poor Ukrainian girl, refugee who was sitting on a train and had her throat slashed by a repeat felon, career criminal, psychopath, alleged. And then just more recently, there was another poor young woman in Chicago, again, sitting on public transport, and a similar, repeat felon comes up and sets her alight, pours her gasoline on her and sets her alight. We're seeing more and more of these atrocious crimes occurring in blue cities. Is there any involvement that you have or can have?
Well, there is involvement, but I can't really talk about our pending investigations. What I can say is that we have federal civil rights statutes that make it illegal for someone to do something. Now, these are controversial, but a hate crime. Now, what is a hate crime? It isn't hate speech. That's protected by the First Amendment. It is a crime motivated by an illegal protected characteristic. So that would include someone's race. That would include sexual orientation under the Matthew Shepard Act. Mm-hmm. That would include sex as well under some statutes, or disability. And so where there's a crime that's motivated, for example, by the person's religion or their race, and it used to be just minority race, but we interpret it under numerous recent federal civil rights rulings and by the United States Supreme Court as everybody. White people have rights, men have rights, everybody has rights in this country, Christians. We brought numerous cases protecting Christians from attacks, firebombing, and plots to firebomb American churches, American synagogues. There's a Holocaust survivor who was murdered in Colorado because they were participating in a peaceful rally to remember the hostages in Israel before they were freed. So these are all federal civil rights investigations we're doing. I mean, I've publicly announced that we're looking at the Park East synagogue blockage here in New York just recently. We did a civil rights case a few weeks ago under the FACE Act in West Orange, New Jersey, where a gang of anti-Zionists blocked access to a synagogue and disrupted a religious service there. So
we saw it when you said the Park East. This is the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where Jews trying to go to a synagogue were blocked aggressively by a group of
physically blocked
anti-Zionists. But my question is that during the Biden administration, we had people, and previously we had, pro-life Christians praying outside abortion clinics silently by themselves, not blocking anyone, who went to jail.
Yes.
How can that happen? And then these people who are blocking the synagogues get away scot-free?
Well, they're not getting away scot-free.
Aren't they?
No.
Good.
They're not going to get away scot-free. We have active hand-in-hand investigation with the Southern District of New York to exactly what happened there. The example I gave in West Orange is a recent example. And we have asked people from all sides, walks of life. There were definitely dozens, if not hundreds, of instances of crisis pregnancy centers being blocked in the last administration, where the DOJ firebombed, blocked, attacked, et cetera, and the DOJ did nothing about it.
No.
They did something about it in one case, which I really recently just won a ruling just 2 days ago in the 11th Circuit, where what they, I think, try to show being even-handed. They did many cases involving persecuting peaceful pro-life protesters, all of whom the president pardoned, by the way. Nice. They were convicted, the president pardoned them. But in the case of, there was a group called Jane's Revenge.
Yes.
Jane's Revenge.
It's a terrorist group. Really.
You said the word, not me, blocked access to multiple and threatened and made violent threats against multiple crisis pregnancy centers, pro-life centers in Florida, in different districts in Florida. There was a prosecution under the Biden DOJ for conspiracy and for violations of the FACE Act. And the single defendant who went to trial in those cases, she lost. And I argued that case in the 11th Circuit 2 months ago, and we just got a positive ruling in our favor saying that it's a violation of the Klan Act conspiracy statute to conspire to attack those crisis pregnancy centers. That's a really great pro-life centers. That's a great use of that law. The case I mentioned in New Jersey involving the synagogue is the first case in over 30 years of the statute being around of the DOJ prosecuting a blockage of a house of worship, any house of worship. Right. And so you look at what happened here in Manhattan recently. It's right next to a Jewish school as well. Right. So children were terrorized and threatened by this. And the goal of these folks, to me, seems clear, to make people feel danger and risk at exercising their First Amendment right to go to temple, to go to church. This is completely un-American. And in the less than 8 months that we've been in office here in the Civil Rights Division, I think we brought more cases to protect people of faith than entire 4-year and even 8-year administrations and other Republican and Democrat administrations. So the commitment to protect people of faith is really important, and it's something important to me. In my own faith, the Sikh faith, we've seen people die in terrorist attacks on houses of worship here in the United States. It's un-American, and we're not going to put up with it in this DOJ.
That's a good segue to talk about you and your background. You were born in India, and your father was a doctor, and I think your grandfather was a 4-star general in the army.
The Air Force.
In the Air Force.
Yes.
And then you came here. So tell us about what that was like for your family and your youth. And did you suffer any discrimination growing up, or were you just forging ahead?
I didn't even learn how hard it was for my dad to leave his homeland and my mom to, of course, different challenges in their 20s until I had to write my dad's obituary. He died in September last year. My mother had meticulously kept every single document. And so I was going through them to see the number of letters that he sent and how he had to start his medical residency in orthopedics again and again and again. Wow. First, they went to the UK. At the time, Indira Gandhi was a prime minister of India, and she didn't want the smart people to leave. She wanted them to stay there and suffer under their socialism. India was a Soviet client state at the time, so they wouldn't give doctors discharge certificates to leave the country. Right. So it was really hard. They had to really go through a number of machinations to do that. And first, they were able to go to the UK, where my brother was born. And I was a small child, 6 months old when I left India, and my brother was born there. They didn't like the UK either, and socialized medicine. My dad didn't want to practice that way. So there was an opportunity during the Vietnam War where there was a real shortage of physicians here, where the United States was asking foreign medical graduates with good training to come and do their medical training here and be part of that. So my dad moved to New York. I started American school here in the Bronx. Right. And my dad did his medical residency, finished it as a chief resident at Albert Einstein Medical College in the Bronx, which is part of Yeshiva University. And so it was very interesting for me. I grew up surrounded by people in an Orthodox Jewish community. I went to an Orthodox Jewish preschool. And I was just telling this group yesterday,
because you just won an award.
I won an award from a Jewish educational nonprofit yesterday for our civil rights work at the DOJ. And I was telling them, when I was growing up, my dad wore a turban until the day he died.
Because he was Sikh.
He was a Sikh.
Yeah.
And my brother was a turban. And I thought everyone's dad wore something on their head and had a beard. And then it was only when I moved to rural North Carolina after my dad started his practice, people wore things on their head too, but they were white hoods over there in the South in the 1970s. There still was vestiges of the Klan. Literally when my dad wanted to did not want to raise his family in the New York environment. Yeah. He wanted to raise his family in a rural, wholesome environment. And one of his medical school classmates had set up his medical practice serving this rural farming community where, your average American doctor wasn't dying to go work in rural North Carolina. So we moved there. And
how old were you then?
I was 6 years old, and I think started my second grade there at 6 years old. And it was quite a culture shock. There were signs on the highway that into Smithfield, North Carolina, population 7,000, which was the county seat, so the biggest town in the county, saying that the Grand Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan welcome you to Smithfield, North Carolina. It was right next to the First Methodist Church sign and the Baptist Church sign. Those are the two other religious institutions in town.
Welcome to North Carolina.
Welcome to North Carolina. Welcome to Smithfield. The Lions, the Rotaries, and the Klan. Like, it was all normal back then. Now that sign did go away after a year. And my parents didn't know what the Klan was.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did you even know what that was?
They had no idea what the Klan was. We had a neighbor who my brother wouldn't lend him his soccer ball. Our mom said they couldn't play, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to call the Klan on you." That did happen. And my parents took the potential threat of lingering racism there seriously. They exercised their Second Amendment rights, and mom and dad both took shooting lessons, and we had firearms in our house in case, but we never had a physical threat.
But that was the threat they felt.
I think they were just being prudent to protect their families. I do that in DC now. I have a concealed carry permit there, and I'm glad to have that right. And we also enforce the Second Amendment in the Civil Rights Division. But look, it wasn't the easiest thing to have a funny name and my long braids and different hairstyle. And my mom still sewed all my clothes because that was her convent school upbringing in India. So my clothes were kind of homemade and weird. And, I think every kid goes through some level of bullying. It's just different depending on who you are. So I don't consider myself a victim of that or anything, but
makes you stronger.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, there's bullying as adults. There's bullying in the workplace.
I was in Japan.
I dare say I experience bullying sometimes from my colleagues today, but not for long.
But you're actually resilient to it because you've experienced it at a young age and thrived.
I think so. I mean, it equips you with a lot of tools for politics. It equips you. I mean, you don't read the comments, that kind of a thing where you have to just tough it through and get past it. And these are skills that are necessary in business and succeeding. I was the CEO of both a nonprofit and a multi-state law firm before I took this job. And so it does equip you with a lot of skills that sheltered helicopter parent kids, snowflakes, they don't have.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky.
Talking to people like J.D. Vance, in fact, and this is the way I feel myself, is you worry that your own children are not, so pampered or protected, not pampered, but protected, that they haven't suffered much adversity and therefore don't get to develop that resilience.
I mean, when you look, it's for us, my dad, even in Smithfield, we lived outside the county limits. We lived in a bunch of tobacco fields and soybean fields, and entertainment was, okay, go out and play, find some frogs in the creek, or maybe in the middle of the night, push a cow over or something silly like that. Those are the kind of entertainment before the internet. And
awesome.
It's a little different today. So, yeah.
You went on to be very successful in law. You mentioned that you had a few years in the high-paid corporate world, but then you went into private practice and you started your own successful law firm, and you represented a whole lot of, people that others wouldn't represent, or conservatives who didn't get a lot of love from lawyers. People like Andy No, who was attacked by Antifa, other high-profile conservatives. So how did you become conservative, or were you always conservative because of your upbringing? I mean, you went to law school, you were living in California. Why did that not turn you into a mad lefty?
Well, first of all, I did come from a very conservative family, conservative politically and conservative culturally.
But that doesn't protect you normally.
Well, it started in childhood. We prayed together every day. We went to the temple together. My parents taught me values, American values. And I was just, I think, very patriotic as a kid. I mean, my parents didn't support Jimmy Carter. I remember getting spanked as a, second-year-old for starting a fight in the lunch line in elementary school over the election in
Really?
1976. So that's how far back
In
I go.
second grade?
Yeah, in second grade. And I got smacked
Whose
by
side were you on?
Well, I was on the side of Gerald Ford, so I got
Really?
smacked by my Carter supporting second grade teacher. She had like a big beehive hair.
Oh,
Do you remember
really?
that? Yeah. So
She
that never
smacked you
happened
for
again.
having the wrong politics.
That never happened again. My mom marched down to the school and set them straight about who applies the corporal punishment, and it's not the school; it should be the parents. And
Excellent.
So, anyway,
that was a political lesson.
it was a political lesson. But we also, when Carter became the president, we would talk about the stagflation
Right.
and getting gas every other day based on your license plate
That's
number.
right. Yeah.
And 90% marginal capital gains tax. I'm not sure how many kids hear about that from their disgruntled dad who's paying a lot of taxes,
Yeah.
but I heard about marginal capital gains tax and all of that around the dinner table. And so that really, those lessons, and my mom I was a stay-at-home mom while the kids were young, and then she went on to help my dad build his very successful medical practice. So, the cultural and economic conservatism was very deeply ingrained in me. So I was 16 when I went to Dartmouth, and, I had those values, and I naturally fell in with the conservative newspaper crowd
Right.
there. And my mentors and friends included Dinesh D'Souza, Laura
Right.
Ingraham, and, a lot of colleagues who have gone on to prominence in journalism at the Wall Street Journal and others. And I was a journalist for 1 year after college. That 1 year before I went to law school, I was the assistant editor of the Heritage Foundation's magazine, Policy Review.
The poor Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation's got some challenges with its image these days, but it was at that time, I was a huge fan of Jack Kemp in college, and he was just like that whole brain trust of the Reagan administration came from all those economists there, and it was just a different place then than every institution matures. But anyway, when I left that job and went to law school, Tucker Carlson took that job. So he literally had the exact same job as me, sat at my desk
At the Heritage
Foundation.
Wow.
He calls it a fact checker job. I don't know what he did, but I wrote articles.
Right.
So, but anyway, so I was a journalist. And first of all, the pay was crazy low. It was insanely low.
Yeah.
It was actually embarrassing. And
It's journalism. We
it's
do it for the
journalism.
love.
But then you had to pretend to be objective too. And that was not sitting with me.
Right.
I really wanted to, be kind of taking sides. And that's what I've done for most of my life now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I evolved into the conservative lawyer. Now, I started my career here in New York after clerking for a federal judge, and the judge was a conservative appointee, and I was the president of the Federalist Society, the largest chapter in the country. And so I had a lot of great professors at UVA Law School and a great legal education there at UVA. And but the only career path open to you as a high-achieving, top 10 law school, federal appeals court clerkship, law review person was to go join one of these white shoe law firms here in wherever, New York, Washington. So I started my career here in New York I lived on the Upper East Side. I was at a big law firm here. I got some great training and education there. That firm sent me to London for almost a year. I practiced law in London for a year, got my solicitor's qualifying exam. That was fun. And then I moved during the dot-com boom to Silicon Valley. That's what took me out to California and the gold rush, chasing the e-commerce and all this stuff that was happening back then. Very interesting time in our country's history. And then eventually I got disillusioned with that career path and decided that I wanted to do good with my license. I mean, not that other lawyers don't do good, but there was very little doing good. 9/11 happened when I was at one of these big law firms. And, it was a challenge to be able to actually go out and do litigation on the issues that I cared about. Because that wasn't their jam. If I wanted to go help some liberal group or death penalty case, that was kind of their pro bono offering. Well, I feel like it's part of my faith and part of my personality to do pro bono publico, help the public every day if I can. It's just it's part of my religion. Consider it tithing in some other faiths. That's writing a check. We believe in actually doing good in volunteer work. And so I've always tried to keep a portion of my law career as doing good. And I feel like I achieved the time right before I came into this administration, but that was 100%. I only took clients in cases that I believed in personally and liked. It was a very blessed way to practice law. And I also started a nonprofit several years ago. And what spurred that was I was representing a couple of clients who had issues. One was James Damore.
Oh, yes, from Google engineer.
And
who wrote a document saying that the reason there are fewer female engineers at Google is simply because women aren't interested, I think, in the same sorts of things.
I think I would just say the basic premise was men and women are different.
Yeah.
And, he was your typical engineer, high achieving guy who dropped out of Harvard PhD program in mathematics and computer science to do this job. Like really, really smart guy.
He's just trying to explain that it wasn't.
He had a thesis.
Discrimination.
He had a thesis, and it was much more complicated than that. It was lengthy, and it was added on to after conversations with many people, and it was weaponized against him. And he suddenly, was unemployed by Google. And so I litigated that case. And
what was the outcome?
Can't talk about the outcome.
Oh, okay. But it was you came to a deal.
Let's just say that we came to a deal after Google lost an early motion. Right. Every lawyer knows what that means.
Right.
So anyway, the case was allowed to continue, and then suddenly the case was not happening anymore. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
I'm allowed to say that.
So you're a good lawyer, very successful. I can't think of one that you've lost. What was your favorite?
I've lost cases. I lost the Rogan O'Hanley case against Twitter, which we did not prevail on, which I think was wrong. The Supreme Court also whiffed and punted in a very similar case, Missouri versus Morthy.
It started off as Missouri versus Biden.
I feel bitter about both of those cases.
Which is the biggest free speech case.
Yes. Our case was like a companion case and went up to the Supreme Court around, after that case. And after the court issued the ruling in the Missouri case, the court denied our cert petition. So they kind of looked at it as the same track.
But isn't that going back? Isn't that big free speech case, Missouri versus now it's called Murthy? Isn't that going back?
Yeah, I mean, I, again, probably can't. I'm not up to date on what's happening in that case. There are still a couple of other cases out there that are companion cases that are before the DOJ now because of parties have switched sides. The government has to defend some of the government officials in those cases. So I won't
But these were
comment
Biden officials who were actively censoring Americans, reaching out to
Even so, when you're
Twitter.
suing your personal capacity or your representative capacity, the next government has a choice to make. Do we continue to protect the executive decision making? So that's not something that I'm involved in. The civil division is involved in that case. But I started the nonprofit because there were cases like this where they would have benefited from crowdsourcing, foundation funding. And for that, you have to have a nonprofit. So I started the Center for American Liberty. I had a highfalutin Latin name for it originally because I was an ancient Greek and Latin major at Dartmouth. But I was quickly persuaded by professional staff to change that to something more accessible. So Center for American Liberty has been the name of that nonprofit for several years. And it is thriving in my absence, I'm told. And so I had to give up the two nonprofit roles, the two CEO roles, the nonprofit role and the law firm role to take my government job.
And now tell me about your beloved late husband, Sav, who I never met, but I felt I knew a little through your Twitter feed where you often showed the beautiful meals that you would make for him. He was unwell, but you were married for 11 years. Tell me about him and how you managed to get through his illness and death.
Yeah, we were together for 16 years. I met him when I ran for the state assembly in 2008. And it's kind of a joke when I give talks to young women out there about getting involved in politics, because a lot of women are intimidated by it. I tell them that I didn't win the election, but I won the game of life because my husband was then a Democrat. And I had met him because one of my mother was like my biggest champion. And when she learned I was running for this really unwinnable seat, it was an open seat where a Democrat had termed out. And so it was an open seat and I was going to run for the state assembly. And I was involved in the San Francisco GOP at the time. And we tried to run candidates for every seat. So I stepped up to run and my mom immediately jumped into the fundraising challenge. She's been a big, prolific fundraiser and nonprofit organizer, real community organizer in the Sikh community.
Right.
She basically strong-armed every sick doctor in America to write me a check for my campaign. And so she really helped me out a lot. But one of those doctors was married to Sarv's niece. And so when I picked up the check from them, they told me I should contact him because he was on the board of a radio station in San Francisco. So I went and met him, and he was on the board of the far left Pacifica radio station at the time. And so he
was far left?
No.
Oh.
But he was a musician. He was a banjo player. Oh. And he had self-taught banjo player. And so he had gotten involved in it for just cultural and artistic reasons. And he had owned a music club in Berkeley. He was kind of anti-war protester. He was left for sure, but not far left.
Yeah.
Turned out to be very conservative socially.
Right.
Like a lot of old school Democrats, actually. Yes. They call themselves Democrats, but they don't realize that the party had left them. So anyway, so I met him and I asked if he could help me get on the radio. And he said, that's never going to happen, but he'd love to take me sailing. And so that was his line. It was a very effective line. So eventually he came to all my fundraisers. And then after I lost the election, we started dating and seeing each other and moved in together. And then we got married a couple of years later. But before he married me, he had to change parties. So I couldn't be an activist. It came naturally. First, he left the Democrat Party, became what's called in California declined to state. When I ran for state party leadership, I said, no, I can't be married to a Democrat. So you're going to have to, change a little more. So he did. And he was actually, in our family, he was the early adopter of Trump as a candidate in 2016. Yeah, we watched the first debate, and he'd been kind of supportive of another candidate out of pity. And he's like, this is just game over. The only person who's going to win this election is Donald Trump.
Really? From the first debate?
From the first debate.
Wow.
Yeah. So
not many people
he
can
never
say
let me forget that until, his last month on this earth. But he was quite a bit older than me. And so we had a very happy life together. We had a home in Sonoma and home in San Francisco, and he was my biggest cheerleader. So every woman should be so blessed to have a man who is so supportive of them. And I just always had that. So I was very lucky. And I wouldn't have the successful law firm and nonprofit without his constant support. Wouldn't have run for chair of the Republican National Committee and taken some of those ambitious, some would say quixotic endeavors on without that incredible support from a man behind me. And so I really enjoyed that. But he developed Parkinson's disease during the last 2 years of his life. Might have been 3 years. Wasn't properly diagnosed because thanks to COVID, people weren't easy. It wasn't easy for people to get a doctor's appointment. The doctors were scared. So, again, the way I was raised, like both my grandparents, my mom's parents, my dad's parents died much younger. My mom's parents lived and were cared for by their 2 daughters in North Carolina and died in comfortable home settings. Yeah. That's my culture. And so when my husband got sick, I was blessed with a lot of law partners and colleagues at my nonprofit and my law firm. And so I was the primary caregiver, and then we had to have some other professional caregivers living with us in the house in the last few months. But that is a challenge. It is a challenge. And
was it also a beautiful time?
I feel good about playing that role. Yeah. And I know that had God not brought us together, had we not met, his circumstances would have been very different. My circumstances would have been very different. So it was a privilege. My dad was also terminally ill at the same time. He had a pulmonary fibrosis. So mom was going through that. And, it brought our families closer together. There was reconciliation of some family members who weren't talking sometimes, because of these health challenges. And everyone should be so lucky if they're sick to have a loving spouse or person in their life, because the fate of you look at what happened here in the state of New York, the fate of the ill in the nursing homes and the quality of care you get in some of these institutions is pitiful. Our healthcare system is broken. I have a hard time getting medical care as a pretty successful person in DC right now. All the private practices are full. So he was lucky.
Government can't step into what families are supposed to do.
And I mean, one of the drawbacks of what you see in American culture in a way. And you see in older cultures, what some would say backward, people don't let their elderly or their sick die alone.
Yeah.
That's just not a thing.
Yeah.
Never happened in my family. And so
that was
a beautiful thing.
Cruel about COVID.
It was.
People were forced to leave their elderly alone.
It was. And so saying goodbye was difficult. I actually drove my husband to the hospital on the day that he died. And we lived on that famous crooked street in San Francisco. And I didn't want to wait for the ambulance to have to come and find a way to park. So his caregiver and I put him in the car and we drove to the hospital and didn't make it. So, he was on life support for a day until we, said goodbye. So that's a challenge. Then 6 weeks later, my dad passed away.
Oh, you poor thing.
I was able to say goodbye to him. But, these are the challenges in life. And that's why faith, I think, is very important, actually, because it equips you with some longitudinal perspective as to what you do when that happens and how to come to grips with it. But it was moving to DC pretty soon after that and making my way there. I still have people ask me, have you settled in?
Right.
I don't intend to settle in there.
No.
I intend to do a kick-ass job for the American people and for our president and our attorney general, and then return to the fields of private practice and doing good in my law
San
career.
Francisco.
Somewhere. The law firm has 6 offices now in Texas and Virginia and New York, New Jersey, Southern California, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a number of different places I could live. I do love California. It is really hard when you look at the math to justify being a tax resident of California. Now there's talk about wealth taxes here in New York City and California.
You know Gavin Newsom pretty well. And I know we can't really talk about the Prop 50 election redrawing, but as a person, do you think he has got any hope he wants to run for president. Do you think he has any hope? I find him quite repellent. He's unattractive.
Look, his staff, the first death threats I got on my job in the Civil Rights Division fairly recently were from Gavin Newsom's staff laying false charges against me of being involved in the firebombing of a judge's house in South Carolina, which turned out to have been an accident. So they blamed me and Stephen Miller for that. And you get death threats because of that.
Yeah.
I had to literally call the police over some threats that I received. So I kind of have that's to declare my conflict of interest here. I don't like his style and his lack of class, but I hope not. I hope that we are able to see through and look at this. This person isn't untested like Obama was in a way where there was this entire fiction created around him. He's been tested. He's been a governor. He's had notable personal foibles and failures as well as state leadership failures. And I think that there are other more promising for the Democrat Party younger politicians. I think AOC is one of those fictionally created in a lab, characters that may be a more promising one for them. I think that's the bigger threat. The Zoran Mamdamis of the world who are charismatic, attractive, diabolical. That's the next generation. And then you have AI and all this garbage, and whoever controls the AI, I think, is going to control our lives. I mean, I think it's quite scary to think of the extent to which we're ceding control of our lives to machine learning.
Yeah.
It's scary.
And just lastly, Mike Davis, the president is talking about getting the Senate to abolish the filibuster. And I know Mike Davis believes this, and I assume President Trump believes this, that that when the Democrats get in again, which they inevitably will, they will then abolish the filibuster and then stack the Supreme Court and create 2 new democratic states with Puerto Rico and DC, and then it's game over. Do you hold that view?
So that's kind of a political question.
Right.
I would say that is one where I can't really comment.
Right.
I think the administration will let the president and the White House take their. I can't really speak out of school. So whatever they decide, I think is
cementing his executive orders like the voter registration and so on. various election integrity issues in legislation would presumably safeguard the elections.
What I will say is, and this has been said to senators in front of me, is it's very frustrating to have these aren't laws, they're just rules, courtesy rules from an era where there was courtesy. There's no courtesy anymore between the parties. There's no comedy. That the Obama era abolished that. And so when my friends who have stepped up and left their private practice careers and given up their lucrative law firms to become United States attorneys, and then they can't get confirmed because of these rules.
Like Ed Martin.
I see the real life consequences of that in recruiting, in morale, in just staffing, and in the mental health of the people involved. It's really tough to be constantly under fire and then not have, even to get confirmed. I was blessed because I was with a national position. I got 52 votes. Lisa Murkowski didn't vote for me. Not that I'm keeping track, but I was blessed because you could be in limbo forever. You could be in limbo for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's very destructive to your mental health and your economic well-being. It's really difficult. And so I'm not sure that everyone in DC is putting themselves in the shoes of the patriots who've stepped up to help this administration.
And have such a short time to do it, really.
We're almost at a year now. I mean, I'm not even 8 months into my job, but it feels like I've got so much to do in such a period of time. And so...
and really, if the midterm elections, if the Democrats win, then everything's going to be caught
everyone gets investigated, and then we get all the same lawfare as the past. You still have these January 6th alternate elector cases going on in the states. In some states have dismissed them. Some states have not. So there's just
a lot of cruelty.
During the end of 2025 and stuff that happened 5 and 6 years ago is just bubbling its way through the courts. And I know a lot of people out there who are watching this are going to be very impatient as to why aren't there arrests? Why aren't things going on? Well, we're doing things the right way in this Department of Justice. We are giving people the presumption of innocence. We are investigating. We are not dictating conclusions. And we are very determined, but you can't just go out and arrest people without the investigation.
The Democrats do.
They did it, but that's not right.
No.
That's not ethical. I like to say that I work at the United States Department of Justice, not the United States Department of Prosecutions. And so that's a distinction that they teach you in law school. And it's actually in the prosecutorial code of many bar associations. Prosecutors are not meant to just dunk on as many fish in a barrel as they technically can. They're meant to do justice. And that means sometimes you look at a fact pattern and you say, no, I'm not going to do that to that person, or I can't really make out the case, or it isn't fair. Yeah, I could drag them through many years of litigation, but ultimately not get a conviction. You're supposed to make that judgment call up front and say, it's not going to end up where we need it to be, and that doesn't do justice. We're not going to go there. And more prosecutors need to have that attitude. I'm a prosecutor. I'm the top hate crime prosecutor in the country. And so we look at that every day. We prosecute police for police misconduct. We prosecute the FACE Act. So you have to make a judgment call every time you do that. And that
it's an enormous amount of power.
It's an enormous amount of power and privilege. And, I come to it with more years of experience than most people who take this job. And so I feel like 33 years of practicing law has really given me some judgment that, maybe some younger people wouldn't have. And so having also worked in a lot of different settings, I think is really useful. And so...
Well, America's very lucky to have you there in the chair, Harmeet Dhillon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm Miranda Devine. We'll be back with more soon. Let us know what you thought of this episode by leaving a comment below. Also, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss any future episodes of Podforce One.